shit. Oh, you actually had it ready this time. Thanks. Alright, you can go back to whatever you were working on. I'll take care of this. Today, we're talking about SAO again. If you don't know what SAO is, the basic premise of the show is that VR technology is advanced to the point where we can achieve an almost perfect simulation of reality. The debut game for this tech, called Sword Art Online, ends up trapping people in the game, with the only way of escape being the completion of all 100 floors. Also, if their health drops to 0 in the game, their brain is fried and they die in the real world. I've talked about Sword Art Online in a more general sense in the past, but today I wanted to talk specifics. Specifically, I wanted to talk about the protagonist, Kirito, and how there might be more to his character than meets the eye. If you're an anime fan, when I mention the name Kirito, there's a good chance that the picture that's painted in your head is a character that's bland, purely wish fulfillment, and has no character growth. At least, those are the complaints I tend to hear when I bring up this character to people. For whatever reason, this character has a reputation of being one note and not having any depth to him. People write him off as this OP character that never has to face any real challenges. There's video upon video out there trying to convince you about how bad this protagonist is. Now, maybe this is because I watched the show after the initial controversy had died down, but I've never been able to understand why people see Kirito this way. I've always sort of been able to understand what his character is, not because he's a super basic character, but because the show repeatedly shows you who he is. Kirito isn't wish fulfillment, he's a jerk. From the very beginning, we see him shut himself in his room, ignoring his sister while he's counting down the seconds to play the new game that he's been waiting to escape in. He creates a terrible first impression on nearly everyone he meets, tending to paint himself as the villain by acting like an edgelord. I mean, the dude literally without fail chooses to wear all black all the time, even if it's an inconvenience for him. He's a lazy dude that only follows his intrinsic motivations.
See, Kizit, he's one note. He's a bad character.
No. This is how he wants people to see him, and that facade seems to apparently have worked on you. Kirito paints this picture of himself because, like all good characters, he's flawed. Upon learning his biological parents died in an accident after his birth, and he was actually adopted by his aunt and uncle, he began distancing himself from basically everyone. Most notably, his cousin Sukuha, who up to that point he thought was his real sister. This is when Kirito looked for his escape in video games, which is honestly what we all do when we play games. He's vulnerable, he's a loner. Every time he tries to reach out, the world seems to deny him. I could couple up a ton of examples of this from the show, but I feel like one episode in particular really showcases who Kirito is. Red-nosed reindeer. This episode is a defining moment for our hero, and it's one of the earliest episodes. You don't need to read between the lines to see the depth of this character. A while after painting himself the villain at the floor 1 boss to further distance himself from becoming close to people, Kirito begins to let his guard down again, and starts to want some people to talk to while in this death game. This is where he meets the guild known as the Moonlit Black Cats, a small, mid-level guild composed of people that seem to be kind of optimistic despite the situation they find themselves in. They have goals and aspirations, and Kirito forms a bond with them. Namely, Sachi. Sachi's a bit different from the other guild members. She doesn't tend to share the same optimism that they do. She constantly seems to combat the fear of dying in this game and seems to grow more certain of her demise as the days go on. She feels useless in the guild. Kirito, of course, learns of this and does something he probably hadn't done in a long time. He makes Sachi a promise that she isn't going to die to the death game. I bet you can see where this is going. Later, Kirito helps lead the group to find some treasure while the leader Keita is finding out a suitable base to buy for their guild. The group eventually finds a treasure room but soon learns that the room is trapped. They can't escape. Enemy upon enemy begins to spawn quickly, proving to be too much of a force for the group, save Kirito. In a desperate attempt to slay the waves of enemies, he watches as one by one all of his friends die in front of him, including Sachi. Kirito being the only survivor, he has to inform Keita that the guild is dead. Keita jumps off a Vinecrad in a state of shock at what has happened. Soon after, whispers began to spread of an event boss that would spawn on Christmas Eve. This boss would drop a rare item that could revive a player. Kirito goes to find the boss to right his wrong. After barely surviving the fight, he defeats the boss but learns that the item can only revive a player 10 seconds after their HP has dropped to 0. He mourns for a second and then drops the item for someone else. He has no use for it now. He had no plans for forming a bond with anyone again. Back at the inn he was staying at, Kirito begins to make a plan to die, soloing the next floor boss, but then notices an item in a shared inventory with Sachi. He finds a recording Sachi made before she died, and, well, I'll just let it play.
Looks like I still have time, so seeing how it's Christmas and everything, I'll sing you a song. Thank you. Goodbye.
She's urging Kirito that no matter what, he needs to live. He needs to hold on to life and beat this death game. You don't have to like SAO. You can argue it's simply not for you, or you prefer other characters over Kirito, but I don't think there's an argument you could make that would convince me that this guy is static, bland wish fulfillment. He spends too much time in his thoughts. He needs help, but he often insists on suffering. He's a loner who only follows his intrinsic motivations. He suffers from a guilt complex and often thinks he deserves what's coming for him. But no matter how dark the day or how buried in guilt, anxiety, or depression he becomes, Kirito always seems to reach people who can relate to him. He finds people who can see him in themselves. He did that for me, and I know he did that for many of you. So thank you, Kirito.